The morning sun sliced through the blinds of Marcus Carter's penthouse, casting jagged golden streaks across the polished hardwood floors. The light wove a delicate dance, catching the edge of a glass coffee table, glinting off a minimalist steel sculpture, and settling on a framed photo, a candid moment of Marcus and his daughter, Maya, their faces alight with pride at her middle school science fair, her project on solar panels glowing behind them. Marcus stirred, the silk sheets whispering as they slid from his muscular frame, cool against his skin in the quiet of dawn. It was Saturday, a sacred pause from the relentless grind of Carter Enterprises, the multimillion-dollar tech empire he'd forged from a single laptop in a cramped studio apartment, fueled by grit and sleepless nights. Today, he wasn't the CEO whose chiseled features graced Forbes covers or whose voice commanded boardrooms with the weight of a gavel. Today, he was simply Marcus. A man in a plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers scuffed from years of wear, their soles etched with the miles of his journey. He reached for his phone on the mahogany nightstand, its screen glowing with a rare gift, an empty calendar. No mergers, no investor calls, no crises demanding his attention. Just a mundane errand to the bank to withdraw cash and a lunch date with Maya, his 12-year-old firecracker, whose sharp wit, love for innovation, and unyielding stubbornness mirrored his own. She'd been buzzing about a new vegan spot downtown, her texts brimming with exclamation points, and Marcus couldn't resist her infectious enthusiasm. The thought of her dissecting the menu with her usual intensity brought a quiet smile to his face as he rolled out of bed, the floor cool beneath his feet. The bathroom filled with steam as Marcus stood under the shower's scalding spray, letting it melt the week's tension from his shoulders. He moved with purpose, toweling off, the mirror fogged with his reflection a blur, fitting, perhaps, for a day he planned to be unremarkable. He dressed quickly, the soft cotton of his t-shirt a contrast to the tailored suits that defined his public life. Grabbing his wallet and keys, he paused at the door, eyes lingering on Maya's photo. Her voice rang in his mind from their last call, "Don't be late, Dad. You promised." The words carried weight, a tether to the one person who saw him not as a titan but as her hero. He wouldn't let her down. The elevator's hum was a soothing constant as it carried him from the penthouse's sleek silence to the garage, where his Tesla waited, its obsidian curves gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights like a panther poised to strike. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against his back, and pulled onto the streets of downtown Atlanta. The city was alive, its pulse a familiar rhythm that thrummed in Marcus's veins. Street vendors called out, their voices weaving through the strum of a guitarist busking on a corner, his melody a soulful counterpoint to the morning's chaos. The air carried the rich, nutty scent of coffee from a nearby cafe, mingling with the smoky tang of a food truck's grill, where a line of workers swapped stories over breakfast tacos. Marcus loved Atlanta, its vibrancy, its raw edges, its soul forged in resilience. This city had shaped him, challenged him, and, in its own way, claimed him. He navigated its arteries with ease, the Tesla's hum blending into the urban symphony. Parking a block from First National Bank, he stepped into the sunlight, its warmth a gentle hand on his shoulders. He blended into the crowd, office workers, joggers, families, his casual stride unmarked by the weight of his name. For a moment, he was just another face, and the anonymity felt like freedom. The bank's interior was a study in calculated elegance, marble floors gleamed like liquid stone under recessed lighting, glass walls reflected the quiet bustle, and the air held a sterile chill, faintly metallic. Customers moved through the space with purpose, some scribbling on deposit slips, others tapping impatiently at ATMs, their murmurs a low hum punctuated by the occasional beep or rustle of paper. Marcus approached a teller's window, where a young woman stood, her name tag reading Emily. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her smile polite but guarded, her eyes flicking over him with a subtle appraisal that lingered too long. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice warm, disarming, honed from years of diffusing tension in boardrooms. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." Emily nodded, her fingers hovering over her keyboard like a pianist awaiting a cue. "Of course, sir. May I see your ID and account number?" Marcus slid his driver's license and a slip of paper across the counter, the numbers written in his precise, angular script. Her fingers brushed his as she took them, a fleeting contact that felt oddly deliberate, like a test. She typed, her eyes darting from the screen to his face, a faint crease forming between her brows, barely perceptible but enough to spark a flicker of unease in Marcus's gut. "One moment, please," she said, her tone shifting, less friendly, more clipped, as if a switch had flipped. Marcus's smile faltered, a crack in his calm. Delays weren't his world. He was Marcus Carter, a name that opened vaults, a handshake that sealed fortunes. But he steadied himself, leaning casually against the counter, reminding himself that banks had protocols, especially for sums like his. He glanced around, grounding himself in the ordinary, a mother wrestling with a toddler's flailing arms, an elderly man counting coins with arthritic fingers, a suited woman checking her phone with a sigh. Normalcy. Routine. Yet the prickle of unease grew, a whisper at the edge of his mind. Emily lifted the phone, her voice dropping to a near whisper, her words muffled but sharp. Marcus strained to hear, catching fragments: verification, hold, account activity, each syllable tightening the knot in his stomach. His fingers twitched, itching to check his watch, but he resisted. Maya would be at the restaurant soon, her impatience a storm if he kept her waiting. Minutes crawled, each second heavier, thicker, like molasses. Emily hung up, her smile now a thin veneer, stretched tight over something unspoken. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice measured, "but we're going to need additional verification before we can process your withdrawal." Marcus's brows knitted, irritation flaring like a match. "Additional verification? I've been a customer here for over a decade. My accounts are in order." Her eyes flicked away, avoiding his, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. "I understand, sir, but we've updated our security protocols. It's standard procedure." The words landed like stones, hollow, unconvincing. Marcus exhaled sharply, forcing his voice to stay even. "Fine. What do you need?" Emily's response was clipped, robotic. "A second form of ID and proof of address, a utility bill, perhaps." He reached into his wallet, producing his passport and a folded electricity bill, its edges frayed from being carried too long. He handed them over, his fingers steady despite the heat simmering beneath his skin, a slow burn of frustration. Emily took them and vanished into a back office, her absence leaving Marcus exposed, the weight of curious glances from other customers prickling his neck like static. The bank's hum grew louder, oppressive, the air dense with unspoken tension. Marcus shifted his weight, checking his phone. A text from Maya blinked on the screen. "Dad, you coming? I'm starving." His thumbs moved quickly. "Almost done, kiddo. Be there soon. But doubt gnawed at him, sharp and insistent. This wasn't right. He'd withdrawn millions before, striding in with suits worth thousands, his presence unquestioned. Today, in jeans and a t-shirt, he was a question mark. The realization curled around his thoughts, bitter and familiar. His skin, his casualness. They'd marked him as other, as suspect. He clenched his jaw, anchoring himself in the truth of who. But the minutes stretched, each one a needle in his patience, pricking deeper. He considered walking out, hitting an ATM, but the cash was for Maya's lunch, for her smile, for a day that was supposed to be theirs. He stayed, rooted by duty. Emily returned, her steps hesitant, shadowed by a man in a crisp navy suit, his posture rigid with authority. His name tag read, "Mr. Harris, branch manager." His smile was tight, practiced, but his eyes carried something colder, suspicion, disdain, a flicker of superiority that set Marcus's nerves alight. "Mr. Carter," Harris said, his voice smooth but edged, like a blade wrapped in silk, "we're going to need more time to verify your information. Please step into my office." Marcus's pulse spiked, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Your office? For what?" Harris's smile held, a mask that didn't reach his eyes. Just a precaution, sir. We want to ensure everything is in order. The words hit like a slap, their weight heavy with implication, each syllable dripping with assumption. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms, grounding him in the sting. He knew this script, had heard it in the subtle slights of store clerks trailing him, in the sideways glances of cops eyeing his car, in the colleagues who questioned his credentials despite his resume. This wasn't about verification. It was about his skin, his clothes, the audacity of his existence in a space they deemed his too boldly claimed. Fine, he said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with steel, a warning coiled beneath the calm. But this is highly unprofessional. Harris didn't respond, merely gestured toward a hallway, his hands sweeping with false courtesy. Marcus followed, his sneakers silent on the marble, each step a pulse of defiance, a refusal to shrink. The office was small, claustrophobic, its walls closing in like a trap. A cluttered desk dominated the space, buried under memos, forms, and a coffee mug with a faded logo, its rim chipped from careless use. A single window framed the street outside, where life moved on, oblivious. Harris closed the door with a soft click, the sound unnervingly final, like a lock snapping shut. He sat behind the desk, motioning to a chair with a flick of his wrist. Marcus remained standing, arms crossed, his gaze a blade that pinned Harris where he sat. "Mr. Carter," Harris began, his tone formal, rehearsed, as if reading from a script, "we've received alerts on your account that have raised concerns. We need to confirm everything is legitimate." Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the pretense. "What kind of alerts?" Harris shifted, his fingers tapping the desk, his eyes avoiding Marcus's, darting to the papers as if they held answers. "Unusual transactions, large withdrawals, transfers to overseas accounts." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching, his patience fraying like a worn rope. "Those are my transactions. I'm a businessman. I have investments in Singapore, Dubai, London. My company moves millions. This isn't unusual, it's my life." Harris nodded, but his skepticism was palpable, a silent accusation hanging in the air like smoke, choking the room. "I understand, sir," he said, the words empty, "but we have to be thorough. We can't take risks." Marcus's voice rose, not loud but heavy with weight, each word deliberate. "Risks? My company banks millions with you. I've been a customer for years, never a single issue. Why is this suddenly a problem?" Harris's face hardened, a flicker of unease crossing his features, guilt, perhaps, or the fear of being called out, exposed. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice tighter now, "I'm going to have to ask you to remain here while we contact the authorities." The word "authorities" landed like a blow, stealing the air from the room, sending Marcus's heart slamming against his ribs. "The authorities?" he repeated, his voice steady but laced with disbelief, a storm brewing beneath the surface. "Are you serious?" Harris's nod was grim, his eyes flickering with something that might have been regret but felt more like defiance. "It's protocol." Marcus's mind raced, a torrent of thoughts colliding like waves in a storm. He saw Maya, waiting at the restaurant, her eyes scanning the door, her phone clutched tightly as she wondered where he was. He saw his employees, his board, the empire he'd built brick by brick, each deal a battle won. And he saw the countless times he'd faced this same quiet prejudice, the clerk's shadow at his heels, the cop's flashlight in his window, the colleague's raised brow at his ideas. But this? This was a new audacity, a brazen escalation that threatened to unravel everything. "This is absurd," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, sharp enough to draw blood. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a CEO, a father, a man who deserves respect." Harris raised his hands, a placating gesture that felt hollow, patronizing. "Please, Mr. Carter, sit down. We're just following procedure." Before Marcus could fire back, the door swung open, and two police officers stepped inside. They were both white, their faces carved in stern lines, their hands resting on holstered guns with a casual menace that tightened Marcus's chest. The air thickened, tension crackling like a live wire. "Mr. Carter," the taller officer said, his voice clipped, devoid of warmth, "we're going to need you to come with us." Marcus's heart pounded, anger and fear warring within him, each vying for control. He forced himself to breathe, to stay grounded, to keep his mind clear. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, his tone measured, deliberate, a shield against the chaos threatening to consume him. "This is a misunderstanding." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable, a wall of indifference. "We'll sort it out at the station," the second officer said, stepping closer, his hand still on his holster, the gesture a silent threat. Marcus's instincts screamed, fight, run, defend, but he knew resistance could spiral, could turn this moment into something far uglier. He thought of Maya, of the headlines that could follow, of the damage to everything he'd built, brick by painstaking brick. "All right," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, a steel core beneath the surface. "I'll come with you. But I want my lawyer present." The officers nodded, a curt acknowledgement, and Marcus was led out of the office, through the bank's gleaming lobby. Customers stared, their whispers trailing him like shadows, shock, curiosity, judgment, their eyes boring into him. He held his head high, his jaw set, refusing to let them see the humiliation burning inside him, a fire that threatened to consume him. Outside, the sun was still bright, its warmth a cruel mockery of the storm within. The police car waited, its lights off but its presence a glaring accusation, a symbol of a system that saw him as less. As Marcus slid into the back seat, the door slamming shut with a hollow thud, he felt the weight of centuries, of stories like his, of men and women reduced to suspects for daring to exist, to thrive, to claim their place. The police station was a cold, fluorescent maze, its walls sterile, its air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. Marcus was processed with mechanical efficiency, fingerprints pressed onto a scanner, mugshot snapped under harsh light, belongings stuffed into a plastic bag with a barcode. The holding cell was stark, its bench hard and unforgiving, the metal chilling his skin through his jeans. He sat, focusing on his breath, in, out, anchoring himself against the tide of anger and helplessness. He thought of calling David Reynolds, his lawyer, a man whose legal acumen was as sharp as his loyalty was deep, but he held off. David's fire would be needed later, for what came next. For now, Marcus thought of Maya. Her laughter, her trust, the way she looked at him like he could fix anything. He couldn't let her see him broken. Hours crawled by, the cell's silence broken only by the occasional clang of doors, the muffled voices of officers, the distant jangle of keys. Marcus's mind churned, replaying the bank, Emily's hesitation, Harris's smug certainty, the officer's cold indifference. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd been profiled, dismissed, dehumanized, their dignity stripped for no reason but prejudice. Finally, the cell door creaked open, and a detective stepped in. He was middle-aged, his hair thinning, his eyes weary but carrying a trace of humanity, a flicker of empathy that felt like a lifeline. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice neutral but not unkind, "we've reviewed your case. There's been a mistake." Marcus's heart leapt, but he kept his face impassive, a mask honed by years of high-stakes negotiations. "A mistake?" The detective nodded, rubbing the back of his neck, his discomfort palpable. "The bank system flagged your account in error. We've confirmed all transactions were authorized. You're free to go." Marcus stood, his legs stiff from hours of sitting, his mind reeling. "Just like that?" he said, his tone edged with skepticism, a challenge. The detective's shrug was almost apologetic, a gesture that carried no weight. "These things happen. Sorry for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. The word was laughably inadequate, a bandage on a gaping wound. Marcus swallowed his rage, collecting his belongings with hands that refused to tremble. Outside, the sun had dipped low, casting long, jagged shadows across the pavement, the air cool with the promise of evening. He pulled out his phone and dialed David, the ring cutting through the city's hum. David answered on the second ring, his voice thick with worry. "Marcus? Where the hell have you been? Maya's been texting me non-stop, freaking out." Marcus exhaled, grounding himself in David's familiar cadence, a tether to sanity. "David, meet me at First National Bank. We've got work to do." The bank was dark when Marcus arrived, its glass facade reflecting the city's neon glow, a mirror to its restless energy. David waited outside, his tie loosened, his face a storm of fury and concern, his briefcase clutched like a weapon. Marcus recounted the day, the teller's suspicion, Harris's condescension, the officer's cold efficiency, the cell's suffocating silence. David's jaw clenched, his voice low, dangerous. "This is egregious, Marcus. We sue. Discrimination, false imprisonment, the works." Marcus shook his head, a plan crystallizing, sharp and unyielding. "No lawsuit. Not yet. I have something better." He led David to the back entrance, flashing his ID to a security guard who nodded them through with a glance. The executive offices were silent, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood, stale coffee, and the faint musk of power. Marcus strode into the boardroom, its long table gleaming under dim lights, a stage for what was to come. He took the head seat, David at his side, and waited, the silence a drumbeat of anticipation. Minutes later, the door opened, and a group of executives filed in, suits crisp, faces a mix of confusion, unease, and thinly veiled arrogance. "Mr. Carter," a man ventured, his voice faltering, uncertain. Marcus stood, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm, his eyes fierce yet controlled. "I'm here to discuss your bank's future," he said, his voice a low rumble, commanding attention. The executives exchanged glances, their discomfort a living thing, slithering through the room. A woman with sharp features and a cold gaze spoke, her tone cautious, probing. "We don't understand. What's this about?" Marcus's gaze swept over them, unflinching, a blade cutting through their pretense. "This morning, I walked into your bank as a customer. I was interrogated, humiliated, detained by police, all because of my skin, my clothes, the audacity of my presence." The room froze, his words a guillotine, their weight crushing the air from their lungs. "I'm not just a customer," Marcus continued, his voice steady, unyielding, a force that bent the room to his will. "I'm one of your largest shareholders. And I'm done with your protocols that profile, that degrade, that destroy." David slid a stack of papers across the table, Marcus's demands typed in stark, uncompromising black ink. "Effective immediately," Marcus said, his voice iron, "you'll implement policies to prevent this. Mandatory sensitivity training for every employee, from tellers to you. A zero-tolerance stance on discrimination, enforced without exception. And the employees responsible, Harris, Emily, gone by Monday, their names erased from your payroll." The executives stared, their faces pale, some trembling, their power stripped bare in the face of Marcus's resolve. They knew his influence, his wealth, his connections, his ability to reshape their world with a single call. "We had no idea," the woman stammered, her voice cracking, a feeble attempt at defense. Marcus cut her off, his voice like a whip. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know. That changes now." A man nodded, his voice shaky, almost pleading. "We'll comply, Mr. Carter. We're deeply sorry." Marcus held their gazes, letting the weight of his words settle, a silent promise of consequences should they falter. "Good," he said, his tone final. "Because next time, I won't be so forgiving." He turned and left, David following, their footsteps echoing in the silent hall. Outside, the city hummed, alive, unyielding, its lights a constellation of possibility. Marcus climbed into his car, the engines purr a quiet vow. He thought of Maya, of the world she'd inherit, of the countless others who faced what he had, every day, everywhere, their stories unwritten but no less real. He wasn't just Marcus Carter, CEO. He was a father, a fighter, a man who'd risen from nothing and would never stop rising. As he drove into the night, the skyline glittering like a challenge, he made a vow. This was just the beginning. He'd use his platform, his power, to tear down every barrier, to build a world where no one felt less, where dignity was a birthright, not a battle. He was ready.